Siomra
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Collecting Issues, your bi-weekly comic book club, where this week we'll be taking a look at Hawkeye Volume 1, My Life as a Weapon, collecting issues 1 to 5 of the 2012 Marvel series. By Matt Fraction and David Aja, with extra art by Javier Pulido.
And collecting issue 6
issue
of Young
6
Avengers.
Of the Young Avengers run with Kate Bishop.
With Kate Bishop by someone else.
Not relevant to this particular podcast because we're focusing on 1 to 5.
Can't bloody remember, Ben. Benjamin.
Yes.
Hawkeye is probably the most famous character we've talked about on this show.
He's definitely the most mainstream character that we've touched on Collecting Issues, yeah.
So bloody, the listeners, Ben, they probably don't need a lot of information, but tell us very briefly, Ben, who even is Hawkeye?
So Hawkeye is Clint Barton.
Barton.
In his original appearance, he's an villain, Michael. Mm-hmm. He's an villain. He first came to the attention of the public in Tales of Suspense in September 1965, issue number 57. Mm-hmm. And he was a carny. His background is as a travelling thief, a carny, if you will. And he's now a bad egg. Michael,
was he an Iron Man villain? Is that how he started?
Yeah, in general, he was just kind of a knockoff Iron Man villain with a couple of trick arrows in his quiver. It's a quiver.
It's a quiver, yeah.
It's a quiver. It took me a second there.
I'm a bloody quiver.
I'm all a quiver.
We're excited about
this particular volume takes a look at Clint Barton in a whole new way.
Well, hold on, man. We're not finished talking about who the hell is bloody Hawkeye.
Well, he's probably most famous for the 2012 Avengers film.
Quite a famous film, Ben.
Yes, quite a famous film. Some would say formative for many a person out there. But others would say it's a terrible film. But that doesn't matter because that's not what we're here to discuss today. He's played by Jeremy Renner on screen, who, quite frankly, in the first couple of films, plays him with all the personality of a wet paper bag.
Well, Jeremy Renner himself, Ben, has said that he basically played him as a dead-eyed Terminator in the first film.
Oh, he sure did.
Well, that was a fault of screenwriting more than Jeremy Renner, I think.
Yeah, probably. It wasn't decided to do with it. The classic Josh Whedon badass character.
But Ben, Hawkeye is basically, he's the Archer that every superhero universe has.
Yeah, so DC has Green Arrow, and Marvel has Hawkeye.
Hawkeye. Ben, does Hawkeye predate Green Arrow? No,
he doesn't. He's Green Arrow is a classic Golden Age 1950s character, and as we said, 1957 here for Hawkeye. He's a copy, but that's not uncommon. Both were copying off each other. Whenever one character became relatively popular, another character would be added on in their parallel universe.
In all anyways, they're both Robin Hood.
They're both Robin Hood, exactly. It all comes from bloody Nottingham.
They're all bloody archers shooting an arrow, being a kind of a villain with a heart of gold.
Exactly. One of the things that became very difficult for them to do is, initially when they were brought together, they were very superhero-y and they had their trick arrows and it's all a bit ridiculous. And
they might shoot you with a boxing glove.
They might shoot you with a boxing glove. Arrow, which is just ridiculous. How do you fit that in a quiver? What's going on? Quiver?
Well, how do the aerodynamics on that work?
You'd have a net arrow, you'd have an electricity arrow,
a glue arrow.
Basically, whatever the plot called for, you had an arrow for that. It was a great Deus Ex Machina or MacGuffin for whatever particular plot you needed to go around. One of the key differences between those two great ones is DC leaned very heavily into Robin Hood and gave him a green costume. Mm-hmm. Whereas Hawkeye went the opposite direction. He's bloody purple. Purple's the key colour.
They're copies by degrees, aren't they?
Yeah.
Green Arrow is close to Robin Hood. Then Hawkeye is pretty much Green Arrow without the green.
Yeah.
And then after him, you get other characters who are basically Hawkeye in a different colour.
Exactly.
But it's all Robin Hood.
It's all Robin Hood.
Does it stem from Robin Hood, Ben? This is a mythology thing, or maybe Robin Hood comes from somewhere. Because there's always been heroic archers in human.
Well, Robin Hood is a folktale. But there does seem to be some link between Robin Hood and Crusades. There just seems to be. Robin of Locksley is what it's based on, and there was a real.
Was there?
Robin of Locksley. As far as I know.
But what I'm saying, Ben, is throughout human history, we've had heroic archers.
Yeah, that's fair.
Artemis,
well, goddess of the hunt, yeah. For some reason, I suppose hunting would have been a much more key pursuit at one point in our existence as people.
And the bow.
And the bow being our most useful projectile previous to...
bloody guns being invented.
It's our most accurate projectile. Should people still hunt with... Well, if we're going hunting, I bring Michael, because Michael can wrestle things.
I'll just wrestle deer to the ground.
But generally speaking, it's quite a key tool
but anyway,
in our cultural history. Anyway, don't know what that has to do with anything what we're talking about today. Let's talk about bloody 2012's Hawkeye
Yes.
by Matt Fraction and David Aja.
What I was going to say was, Ben, that's all largely irrelevant because this is a very fresh take on a character who, until this point, was probably one of the most underwritten Avengers.
Very two-dimensional, Michael. Very two-dimensional. And
What
this,
are his character traits, Ben?
smart mouth.
Yeah, he's got some sass.
Got a quip in his quiver.
Yeah, he's
That's
got a
fun to
quiver. He's got a little flying motorcycle.
He's got a flying motorcycle. And again, he had a shady past. I think they played around with the bad boy from the wrong end of the tracks. Like, I ain't no hero.
Yeah.
Just an archer trying to do his job.
He can do a flip.
He can do a flip. He's a little bit acrobatic here and there. But really quite underwritten, as you said. For the first couple of Avengers movies, not a proper backstory.
Mm-hmm.
Just a guy who had to go around. He had that little bit of conflict with Quicksilver. Like, kid, you're not a hero.
But I'm not even talking about that. I'm talking about the comics. If you had to like talk about not the backstory of the characters, but the character of the characters, I think he doesn't stand out. He doesn't have any. He didn't have any particularly defining traits.
No, not really.
And in this one, he's borderline, Ben. He's bloody well, basically not even a superhero.
No, he's not at all.
He's more like a bloody you.
Well, quite a compliment, Michael. I quite enjoyed this character.
No, I meant it as an insult because he's kind of a schlubby man about town, down on his luck.
Steady.
He's down on his luck.
Steady.
He'll drink coffee straight out of the pot.
Hold.
He has a hangover a lot.
Hold.
You know what I'm saying? You know what I'm saying?
What are you getting at, Michael?
You know what I'm saying? He's
What
a
are
bit
you
of a
getting at?
schlubby man about town.
What are you getting at? Yeah.
Go on, sorry.
You know what he has that I don't have, though?
Arrows.
A skill. And a dog. So, in issue 1, it really sets the tone as something that's not going to be a traditional superhero thing. And I think you made a good point about this, Michael, a little bit before we came on air. There's a famous scene in Avengers.
Oh, you're going to steal it from me, are you?
No, you're going to do it.
Oh, well, I do.
You're going to do it.
Well, Ben, okay.
That was my way of
That was a segue,
letting you jump in.
All right. Ben, my favourite scene in the whole bloody thing is the first panel. Because in the first panel, Ben, take a look at it there. Very good, yeah. In the very first panel, the first page, is Hawkeye jumping off a building, Ben, and shooting an arrow.
So it is.
So there you go, look. Shooting an arrow back up towards the building, Ben. And if you remember from one of your favourite films, Marvel's 2012's The Avengers.
Not true.
That is one of the most iconic scenes. Was this, Ben, and we probably could have researched this, did this comic book come out before or after The Avengers?
Tough call. It
not
almost
sure.
certainly after, because I think it's directly used. That it is actually, sorry, it did come out. The comic came out after the film, and the reason I know that is it was part of Marvel Now, which was the big reboot of the comics to try and capitalize on the Avengers' success.
Very good. Because in the Marvel The Avengers 2012 film, Ben, Hawkeye jumps off a building, takes his last arrow, attaches a grappling hook head, grapple hooks into the building, smashes through what's probably high tensile strength steel or glass. Is a bit sore, and then gets up and rejoins the fight.
Classic.
Whereas in this comic book, Ben, he does exactly the same thing, but then the string snaps, which probably would happen in real life. He smashes into the side of the building, falls down, lands on a car, and is hospitalized for 6 weeks.
Classic.
And that's very much, I felt, the introduction to this isn't your dad's Hawkeye.
Yeah, they're setting the tone.
I'm not using that as an idiomatic expression. I mean your dad's Hawkeye.
Yeah, well, my dad is Hawkeye, as you know.
Yeah.
Clint Barton is my father, hence the hilarious joke about me being similar to my father. Thank you for that. But what I meant was, it does establish itself as firmly a realistic superhero take. And I suppose we should have expected that because we're dealing with Matt Fraction. And one of Matt Fraction's favourite tricks is humanizing otherwise godlike presences or characters. He's a very dialogue-driven, very personality flaw-driven kind of writer. And he really focuses in on what Clint Barton's life would be like as a non-powered member of the Avengers. Because I think what's easy to forget is when you see scenes like that with Jeremy Renner in the 2012 thing, most of what that man has done is completely superhuman, especially if we boil it down to tensile strength glass.
That should have splattered him.
That should have splattered him.
No bother. It's on a skyscraper.
And I think you forget that. It's like he's only human. There's not a lot of abuse he can take. Like if Hulk flicks him, that's it. It's game over.
Yeah, dead.
But
although he definitely has superpowers.
Well, he's fiercely accurate.
Yeah, too accurate. Like he'll play golf and he'll get an 18.
Yeah, Well, I think that's the thing that Matt Fraction plays around with here. That's traditionally a bullseye trait for the classic Daredevil villain. And here, he's not just a bow and arrow guy. He's an insanely accurate guy. That's his talent. His talent is accuracy. It's not necessarily the bow and arrow is what he chooses to use, but he can do it with anything, and that's perfectly illustrated in the opening comic. To try and stop a car from hitting a dog in the middle of the street, he takes a coin and he flicks it. Now he misses because the car is moving, but he's able to throw this coin
with such accuracy
with such force that it goes through a car window, alerts the driver. He knows he's not going to make the shot to stop the driver. He can only distract him, and he chooses to make that shot. So he minimizes the damage to the dog.
No.
But again, this shot sets up exactly what we can expect from Hawkeye. This is a man who tries very hard and fails more often than he wins. And it's a really important character arc that he builds in that first issue. The first issue is a bit of a masterclass on how
let's bloody talk about the issues.
Yeah, so let's talk about those issues.
The collected issues.
The collected issues.
That's what
of
we're
that
here
thing.
for, isn't it?
And in that opening scene, it just sets us up as a life, as to Hawkeye's life. Hawkeye lives in an old brownstone building.
Yeah.
He's on the top floor. He is an Avenger, but it's not really a key part of his existence. And that dichotomy is there from start to finish. And what's interesting about the Hawkeye series is that he's mostly referred to as Clint or Clint Barton.
Or Hawkeye.
Or Hawkeye, as is the common mistake. And it's a real thing of him trying to grapple with his identity as a superhero and an Avenger, but also the fact that he's still schlubby Clint Barton who drinks coffee straight from the pot and is promiscuous and maybe makes some horrible life choices.
Makes a lot of mistakes.
Yeah, he makes a lot of mistakes. And I think it's one of the redeeming features for the character. I think this is the way Matt Fraction has written. And I've rarely seen a first issue establish a character's essence so quickly as in this. He is constantly trying to be the hero, but he's applying Avengers logic to an everyday situation where the bad guys are a lot less black and white. Like, they're not wearing a big costume.
They're Russian.
They're Russian in this particular case. They're not wearing a costume. They're not easy to see. And he makes a bad call. So the central issue of the first issue is that the tenants in his building are having their rent raised by the landlord.
Yep.
The landlord is a Russian landlord,
as
is not uncommon in New York, from what I'm given to understand, not being up to date on the politics of rent in New York.
Rent control and so on.
Very often. And he's raising the thing, and Hawkeye says, oh, well, I have to sort this out. I have to do something about this. And he goes about it in a typical traditional kind of Hawkeye fashion, where he goes and beats the guy up, or he tries to beat the guy up. And it's only later at the end of the issue that we realize I'm perfectly with the character. The Russian landlord says, I'm perfectly within my rights to raise the rent. It sucks for you and your buddies, but I'm raising the rent. And Hawkeye's like, oh.
Yeah, what am I going to do about this?
Fair enough.
Can't kick a man in the head or shoot him with an arrow.
Exactly. Now, there is a lot of characterization that goes into this first issue. We understand that the Russian guys are a little bit slimy in this issue. And the way we do that is with a dog, because they're very abusive towards this dog. And how do you make your audience hate somebody?
Have them kick a dog.
Have them kick a dog. It's a classic thing to make a heel. And so we establish that, and that dog becomes a central part of what we do. Because towards the end of that issue, we see the full consequences of his attempts to be a better person, in that he gets a dog run over.
Yeah, stupid Clint.
Bloody Clint. Now, not intentionally, not through any direct action, but it's a consequence of what he's done throughout the issue. And it's a fantastic piece of storytelling from Matt Fraction. And that becomes the central theme. I'm trying to do right. I very often don't. And it's all about unintended consequences throughout. A little bit later, in a later issue, we see he tries to help a woman. She comes to him with a classic...
A sexy lady.
She's
got red hair.
Lady? We don't know.
A bit like Mary Jane from Spider-Man.
And I think that's kind of what we're trying to do. Matt Fraction is playing with our expectation of what normally happens in a story like this. A woman comes to him, we help the woman falls in love with us, but this time she's a honeypot. She uses her sexy feminine wiles to get protection from a skilled archer like Hawkeye. She kind of leads him around. He does a sex on her. Gets him hook, line, and sinker. And it's interesting to see that inversion of a traditional archetype. And I think that's what Matt Fraction is doing in every issue. He's taking your expectation, he subverts it massively, but he always makes it clear that this was the only possible outcome at any point. You're never there going, what? It's like, but it's always very clear. It's always in world. We understand the payoff that we're going to get, and it's going to be a disappointing one every time.
Issue 2, Ben, which you've skipped over, introduces probably the most important supporting character. Don't you get annoyed at me?
Who's the
just
most
because we're recording this for the second time?
Who's the most important supporting character?
The most important second supporting character, Ben, is Hawkeye.
Kate Bishop Hawkeye.
Kate Bishop Hawkeye.
Kate Bishop Hawkeye. So
tell us about, Ben, who even is Kate Bishop?
Who even is Kate Bishop? So Kate Bishop came to us in the form from Young Avengers. Young Avengers are basically younger counterparts to the Avengers. Shock.
Yeah, Young Avengers. I get it.
Yes.
I get
for the listeners, Michael.
I get references.
And Kate Bishop is she's an heiress. She's quite a rich lady.
Yeah.
But she has taken over the mantle of Hawkeye. And Hawkeye is her mentor, and it introduces us to a very important relationship throughout the entire comic, which is the mentor-mentee relationship between Kate Bishop and Clint Barton.
He doesn't want to sleep with her.
He doesn't want to sleep with her, but that's very important because he is, for all intents and purposes, a promiscuous character. He likes to get the leg over. That's just fine. We'll have no judgment for people that happen to enjoy getting the leg over.
Drinking coffee straight from the pot.
Living a schlubby lifestyle, adopting dogs left, right and centre. But he doesn't want to sleep with her, and that's important. And it's established as, it's not something he hasn't considered. It is something he has weighed up and gone, no, I'm not sleeping with Kate Bishop. And it introduces us, more importantly, she acts as a wonderful window into how Clint Barton views himself.
Go on.
And that is, Clint Barton, I think, suffers from a heavy dose of impostor syndrome.
Oh.
Where we
were talking about this last week.
We were. Where he looks...
In real life. Not on the podcast.
And we were having a heart-to-heart over coffee in the pot.
And schlubbing
about. We had just hit a dog with our car.
There's a little
water there. But what it introduces it introduces us to Clint Barton's imposter syndrome, where he doesn't feel he deserves to be an Avenger.
Right.
And we can see that quite often when he makes that jump to try and be an Avenger, he jumps into situations the way he thinks he's supposed to.
And then makes a hames of it.
As a big hero, and then makes a hames of it. What a great phrase. One of my favourite phrases in English language.
Yeah,
I love it. And makes an absolute hames of it. And again, every failure that he suffers compounds that belief that he's not really an Avenger.
He thinks that she's better than him.
He does, and he frequently says that about her. But then we get a window into who Kate Bishop is, and she will say, he's a great teacher, he's good, I can always come to him with a problem, I can depend on Clint Barton. But he doesn't see that about himself. And it's a great understanding of just why he keeps jumping in head first, because he feels that he has to be an Avenger, but he isn't quite sure how to do it in the same way.
Issue 2 shows us some great examples of how they work together as a team and trust each other. There's a lot of teaming up with no communication. They just know what to do.
They are in perfect rhythm. There's also a great Blade Runner reference in issue 2. The woman that Kate Bishop has to take down in the wig is a complete reference to the replicant in Blade Runner 2 who...
Played by...
I can't remember her name. Michelle Pfeiffer.
It's not Michelle Pfeiffer.
It's
Daryl Hannah.
Daryl Hannah. Yeah. And what's her name?
I can't remember. Daryl Hannah robot.
Yeah, Daryl Hannah replicant.
Anyway, this isn't a Blade Runner fan cast.
It's a nice thing that we see in there. But I think issue 2 really showcases David Aja's talent as an artist who can jump between everyday life with minimal simplicity to fantastic action sequences and colour palettes and things like that.
Tell us about the colour palette, Ben, because we're about to talk about issue 3 and 4.
Yeah.
And issue 4 and 5. And then that changes things up a bit.
That changes things up a little bit. So, one of the best things about this volume, about this trade paperback, is that it actually gives you a little window into David Aja's art process. He provides a little guide to how he colours an issue. And he does it all in blocks in his head first before he applies it to his finished line art. So he's really working from a colour theory point of view, and each issue will get close enough to its own unique colour palette, or each storyline will get its own unique colour palette.
Issue 2 was kind of blues and purples.
Blues and purples, a lot of neon. It's a night scene, so he's chosen those very importantly. You'll notice that when the action really kicks off, he will use orange to cut through it to make you focus on a certain panel or something like that.
Whereas issue 3 then is more yellows and oranges.
It's a more muted,
earthy colours.
Earthy tones, because we're back to real life. We're now dealing with a non-superheroic moment. And that's kind of the way it works. Issue 1 is a regular everyday kind of thing in New York City. Issue 2 is Avengers level shenanigans. Issue 3, back to what we're doing. And then issue 4 and 5 jumps us back into Avengers meets Clint Barton midway.
It has Captain America in it with blonde eyebrows.
It does. Bloody blonde eyebrow Captain America. No
Ben,
good.
Famously here at the podcast, Collecting Issues, this podcast that you're listening to, we're not huge fans of artist changes during runs.
Hate them.
So tell us about the artist change in this collected series of editions.
So Javier Pulido takes over issue 4 and 5 from David Aja, maybe to give him a breather from his fantastic storytelling. I'm not sure. But as you so accurately pointed out off mic, Michael, and I'm going to let you say it because I don't want to step in.
No, you go ahead this time.
I'm going to let you finish.
I'm going to let you finish.
He apes that style a little bit.
He does.
I think there's a fierce economy of storytelling going on in David Aja's work. I've rarely seen someone so capable of mapping out a comic book panel with perfect fluidity, where you can follow from start to finish. There's no confusion when you read a David Aja page. You flow naturally. A lot of design thought has gone into it, and the characters are very minimally drawn, and yet they're perfectly recognizable.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And it's a fantastic achievement by David Aja there's so much happening in each panel, and you follow it without breaking a sweat every time.
I think it can be said that Javier Pulido pulls it off.
Oh, he apes it very well. But
I'm not familiar with his work in general, but
I think he's a fill-in artist by trade. I think he picks up the slack.
Because I don't know what his personal style looks like, but were you not a comic book aficionado, I feel that you wouldn't necessarily notice the difference in art between immediately. I think the bigger difference is the difference in colouring.
Yes.
But the difference in the line work and the panels, I think you could get away with. There's hints of a Darwin Cook about it as well.
Yeah. Again, another revolutionary artist in terms of how to simplify something and keep fluidity. It probably comes a lot more from people who I think probably are more design orientated or illustration orientated as opposed to comic book orientated.
Well, you can see a really huge difference when you compare issue 6 of Young Avengers.
Yeah, which is super comic booky, vivid colours, nothing muted, no pastels, nothing like that. Go, 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 very frenetic, a lot of energy, but it's almost messy in comparison to what we've been reading previous.
Although probably tighter lines.
Yeah, but again, oddly enough, I think the David Aja, Javier Pulido work is meant to be sketchy because you're looking at a man who isn't put together, and it's a really complimentary art style that goes so well with these issues. I love reading his pages, and you'll recall, Michael, when we initially reviewed this on our other podcast, you allowed me to borrow many of those issues, and I really enjoyed poring over them, Michael.
Was that the first time you read it?
No. I had read it on a computer.
Oh God!
From a Comixology.
Oh.
But
this episode not sponsored by Comixology.
Not sponsored by Comixology, but it's the only place I know how to legally obtain comics on the internet, and I can't say where I actually obtain comics on the internet.
Very good.
But it's much nicer to read in person, and it's always nice to get the little breakdowns from David Aja himself. I think it's a beautiful union between him and Matt Fraction. Matt Fraction is a very story-driven guy, and David Aja just seems to have a great understanding. Also,
go on.
Whenever we've posted about Hawkeye on our Instagram, David Aja has given us a like. So he's a very attentive person. He quite enjoys that.
There's some interesting things that happen in this, Ben. A bit of playing around with the medium of comics. Yes. You and I have both read much further into this. In fact, we've both read all of it. But we're only talking about this particular collection, as is what we do here at Collecting Issues.
Yes.
But you can see the kind of seeds of Matt Fraction playing with the medium in this. For example, the speech bubbles. When Clint hears a Russian conversation around the corner, we see in the speech bubbles not what's actually being said, but Clint Barton's interpretation of what's being said. So the first time he hears it, it says, Spanish maybe? And then he goes around the corner and it says, no, maybe Italian? And then finally he realizes it's Russian. Then later on he gets a whack in the head and someone is speaking to him or threatening him. And it doesn't say what the person threatening him said. It said something like, something mumbled backwards underwater.
Yeah.
There's that little bit of playfulness with the media.
It's a great way to immerse people in it as well, though, because we only see that world from Clint's point of view.
Right.
And it's great for us to kind of experience that from his perspective. It really heightens your sympathy for the character as you go along, because you realize that he is just bumbling through a lot of this, experimenting across the board with the medium in general. We have the car chase in issue 4. Is it just issue 4?
Issue 3.
Issue 3. Oh, this is issue 3. So in issue 3 we have a car chase, and I've never seen a car chase done quite so well.
Hard to do a car chase in the comic book.
But they get it. They get it. There are also other examples. They play around with censorship a little bit, and anyone who's listening to this episode can see it in the thumbnail. There is a nude scene where Hawkeye is leaping from the bed as it's shot up to bits by some Ruskies. And there's a Hawkeye mask that just appears to gently censor his genitalia.
Yeah. The best way to censor genitalia.
But that is also the only time that we see him full costume. Traditional Hawkeye costume is the mask.
It's almost a bit of a joke, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It's an absolute little. It's a slight little wink.
Ben, you were saying that you like the way that they develop character through events and through actions rather than exposition. Do you want to tell us about that?
I'll tell you a little bit about that. So we can see, as I said, Hawkeye is a man that's doing his best and frequently fails in that pursuit. And I just love the way Matt Fraction can build relationships without exposition, without dialogue, without anything like that. I think, again, coming back to issue 1, because it's such a strong start, his worry over a dog that isn't his is phenomenal. And I don't think he cares about the dog. I think he's trying to assuage his own sense of guilt in that moment, because he's throwing money at the problem. He's like, just fix the dog.
Fix the dog, you son of a doctor.
And I think the dog becomes a redeeming character. He's a very important window into who Clint Barton is, and he does become a redeeming feature over the rest of the issues. But that's not what we're talking about here, Michael.
We don't talk about that.
Don't talk about that. But you can see very often he struggles with what he's at. And again, Matt Fraction does a lot of building here on character development, because later on we find out that the redheaded lady that he sleeps with...
Oh, Ben, we don't...
Yeah, but it's important in the grand scheme of it to understand
you don't know
the groundwork.
You don't know it if you're only reading these issues.
We don't know it if we're reading these issues. Fair enough. There are other moments... the Kate Bishop relationship, as I said, makes a huge push towards that. But we get to see Hawkeye interact with the other tenants in the building. And that's a huge way of understanding, first of all, how the Avengers are perceived in this world, how Hawkeye is perceived in this world, and more importantly, how Hawkeye interacts with the rest of the world. So one of the real refrains of this comic is, "I'm an Avenger." He will say this quite a lot. And someone will go, "Are you?
Are you now?"
And then other people will be like, "Are you Iron Fist
Iron
or
Fist.
something?" Because it's a blonde guy.
Yeah.
And we're never
Taller
sure.
than Iron Fist.
And his proclamation of "I'm an Avenger" does nothing to calm people down. They're just like, so what do you want me to do about it?
Everyone's Avengers.
Yeah, everyone's Avengers. What do you want me to say here? And we see it again, I think, in terms of issue number 2. One of my favorite things is the Swordsman is one of the key villains of issue number 2. So we have the Ringmaster, who's a classic 60s Marvel villain. Daredevil, he debuted with Daredevil. He's a hypnotist. He has a little hypno wheel in his
classic
hat.
irony villain from the 60s.
And the Swordsman, who it turns out is kind of like a blood brother to Clint. Not a genetic, they were kind of bonded and fired together.
They were trained by the same man.
Trained by the same man, and they've gone very separate paths. The Swordsman is a real bad egg. And he kind of fancies himself as a bit of a
Errol Flynn swashbuckler,
and Clint is a far more pragmatic guy. He's just like, just come on, man, just stop.
Just stop.
And you know, the Swordsman really tries to get under Clint's skin by saying, "You think you're so much better. You think you're so much this. You think you're so much that." And again, we don't have Clint go through his own backstory. Matt Fraction leaves it up to this interaction to show us his backstory. It's not Clint going, "Oh, I knew the Swordsman from back in the day."
I was a flashback.
And there's nothing like that. It's all done. And we have Kate Bishop kind of going, "Oh, how does he know this person?" Because she's not 100% sure about Clint either. Like they don't know each other's backstories in that way. And it's a fantastic way to build a rapport between those two. Stop shooting me with a tiny robot. It's a fantastic way to build up that relationship, and it just continues over the whole runway.
Ben, would you give this comic a Ben's recommends?
This is one of the number 1 Ben's recommends. This is a joyous love letter to a character that didn't really get enough recognition, and one of the few examples where I think the comic book has far outweighed the movie representation of the character. I would have loved to have seen more Clint Barton, Matt Fraction, David Aja in later things in the Avengers, but we didn't get that. We went a different way with Jeremy Renner.
Jeremy Renner's character is very the opposite of this.
Wholesome Christian values across the board.
Down to earth, carpentry loving, family having.
I've just got a ranch and me and my family are going to live it out.
With my secret wife and my secret hobbies.
In my secret
It means that, unfortunately,
wife.
Ben, despite the fact that they're using the logo for this as the logo for the Hawkeye TV series, it's not going to be an adaptation of this, I don't think.
We're going to get a Kate Bishop.
Yeah, we'll get Kate Bishop, but it won't be schlubby Clint Barton living in an apartment.
I'd love an Elseworlds little spin.
Elseworlds.
We can't have one of them.
Get out of here.
I can't have one of them.
No.
Not a Marvel
Ben,
What If.
No, not having. Ben, if people like this, what else should they read other than obviously the rest of this?
Yes, well, read the entire run. It's great. But if you're a fan of it and it really butters your biscuits, so to speak, get yourself involved in Casanova, which is Matt Fraction's Image series about an interdimensional time-hopping Casanova super spy. It's like this in that it's not exposition heavy. It's all done through dialogue and scenarios and things like that. But it takes a hefty dollop of classic 50s sci-fi out there, 1960s bizarre Ray Bradbury moments, and meshes them all into one narrative. Again, a very flawed, fragile male ego central protagonist that's very enjoyable to kind of see him kind of navigate his way through a lot of
Does he have a scruffy
awful
blonde
situations.
hair?
No, he's very much Casanova. He's a very handsome, dapper man, but a long-suffering male egotist, and it's coming back to haunt him in several ways. Great run to take a look at as you go along. If you're into visual storytelling in general, check out more European comics. It's quite a European influenced.
There's a bit of Europeanness to it, all right.
Comic run, swashbuckling events and things like that.
Ben, a lot of the series itself is very TV-like in its presentation.
Yes, it absolutely is.
For example, it has that most episodes start with the classic TV trope idea.
In medias res.
They start in medias res, Ben, what they would call on TV a cold open.
Yes.
And so we see him in a situation and then it flashes back and we see the results of how he got into that situation. So if you enjoy that sort of the TV aspect to it, there's lots of TV series that you might enjoy.
Stacks.
Like bloody Alias.
Classic.
Well, Alias is a mad show, but I mean, it has the kind of similar spy espionage element to it. I also, Ben, quite enjoyed, and although it's set in a very different part of America and it has a very different tone, it has some of the same ideas as the TV show Chuck.
Yeah, the beats are the same.
Yeah, it's got a kind of schlubby down his look character. This one is more of a nerd than a Casanova.
Yeah.
But, and then a woman comes into his life who's very competent and skilled, and they get involved in a bloody spy excitement every week.
Yeah, it's great.
It's very good. In comics terms, Ben, did you ever read the comic book Mockingbird?
No, I haven't.
Mockingbird, I think, Ben, it came out 2 years ago, maybe 1 year ago, 1 or 2 years ago, by Chelsea Kane.
Ooh.
Do you know who Mockingbird is, Ben?
Mockingbird is the sometimes wife, sometimes not wife of Clint Barton.
Sometimes wife, sometimes ex-wife, sometimes Skrull.
Yeah.
Sometimes a superhero, sometimes a biologist. She's an Avenger as well. So if you like the idea of a kind of an Avenger on their time off or what they're doing when they're not avenging, it's a good little comic. I think it got cancelled after issue 6 or issue 8, Ben.
Yes.
And there was quite a lot of backlash about feminism.
Oh, settle down, neckbeards. Settle down.
So much so to the point that in issue 5, I think, on the cover, it's Bobby Morse, Mockingbird, in a t-shirt that says, "Ask me about my feminist agenda."
Good woman. That's a way to stick it to the fedoras.
Stick it to them.
Got him. So that's it from us for this week, ladies and gentlemen. Have you read Hawkeye? Did you enjoy it? Did you keep up to date with it? Did we miss any of the wonderful insights that you might be able to give us? For anyone who's been enjoying the podcast, in 2 weeks' time, we'll be taking a look at Sarah by Garth Ennis and Steve Epting, which is from TKO Studios. And it's a little bit different from what we've covered here on the podcast before because it's a historical biopic.
Is it?
Of a real woman who worked for the Ruskies. And it was given to us and it was suggested to us by one of our listeners, Cron Crafts. So thank you very much, Cron. We will be taking a look at it.
A little bit different, Ben, from our usual
Yes, it looks very interesting. It's taller than your average comic as well.
It is. It's taller and a bit thicker.
It's a thicker, taller comic, and we like them thick here at the podcast. So check it out and come back to us in 2 weeks where we'll be discussing Sarah from TKO.
I've just flicked it open there, Ben. I've seen a panel of a woman getting shot. I hope that's not a major spoiler.
Well, let's find out. So we'll see you next week, or 2 weeks from now, ladies and gentlemen. Bye.
Bye.